everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's vlog, I will be tracing Matt Baker's Jewish ancestry. Now today we'll be starting out by looking at Matt's great-grandmother, Adelaide. Adelaide was born with the surname Levy, which is a very Jewish surname. In fact, it's one of the few truly Jewish surnames. Most surnames that people associate with Jewish families aren't necessarily Jewish surnames, but more surnames that were commonly adopted by Jewish families, but weren't exclusively adopted by Jewish families. And this is a common misconception dealing with Jewish genealogy, and most especially dealing with Sephardic Jewish genealogy. Many people who have looked into possible Sephardic ancestry will often do so because they'll find one of their family names on one of these so-called Sephardic surname lists. But in reality, almost all of these Sephardic surname lists are really lists of Spanish and Portuguese surnames, which were just common among Sephardic families, but also common among the non-Jewish population. And for many Ashkenazi families, these surnames were adopted from Germanic names and Slavic names, sometimes dealing with professions or locations or details about where a family might have lived. And then other times they may just be patronymic or matronymic type of names. But the surname Levy does not fall into that category. So whenever you see that name or one of its derivatives such as Levin, Levi, Levite, stuff like that, then you are often dealing with a high probability of that coming from Jewish ancestry. But of course, there's always the possibility that other people adopt that name for other reasons and they aren't Jewish. So a name like Levy really stands out. Now, going to the tree that we've been building off of on Ancestry, we're just going to go into Adelaide's profile. So we're going to start by looking into Adelaide, and we're going to see, was she Jewish? Did she come from known Jewish ancestry? And can we find that? So here we have Adelaide's page on our ancestry tree that we've been building. We haven't found her parents yet, but we can see in the Find a Grave index, it includes a lot of information, including her parents. But as we've learned in this series, Tracing Nova Scotia Families, we really want to go ahead and jump to the Nova Scotia Archives website to see if we can find her birth record. Because one thing to note is the profile that we have, which was built using what Matt gave us, has a birth date of 1880, but then we have a birth date in the Find a Grave of 1877. So can we find a birth record? So here we see an entry for Adelaide Levy. It's a birth record and it's 1880, June 29th. So when we look at the record, we actually see it's not from when she was born, but this was actually done in the 1940s. We can see Adelaide Levy, female, born June 29th, 1880, place of birth Little Tancook, county of Lunenburg, name of father Jeremiah Levy, maiden name of mother Caroline Wambalt. Were the parents married at this time? Yes. Residence of father when born, Little Tancook. Present address of father, he's dead. But below we also get the affidavit, so someone claiming this information as well. So we see in the matter of the application for the registration of the birth of Adelaide Levy, born at Little Tancook in the county of Lunenburg, I, Miss Emily Levy, so this is some sort of relative, of Tancook Island in the county of Lunenburg, do solemnly declare that Adelaide Levy, whose birth is sought to be registered, was born at Little Tancook on June 29th, 1880. My knowledge of the fact and date of such birth is based on the following circumstances. I lived next door to Jeremiah Levy, and I am 84 years of age. And since this document was written in 1945, that means that this Emily Levy was born in 1861 and was likely about 19 years old when Adelaide was born. More than likely, she's probably a fairly close relative, being she has the Levy name and she lived next door. And we see written at the bottom, I'm sure Adelaide Levy was born June 29th, 1880, and off to the side it says, I remember this birth quite well. Which makes me wonder, was she at the birth and possibly helped Adelaide in her birth? But this is just one record, so let's see, can we correlate it? Well, Adelaide either being born in 1880 or 1877 means that we should find her on the 1881 census, and that should be fairly accurate. If she was born in 1880, she's going to be listed as less than 1 or about a year of age. If she was born in 1877, she'll definitely be listed as 3 or 4 years old. Now, there's technically a margin of error in a sense when it comes to census records, in the sense that sometimes it's not always right. Some things may be off by a year or two. But being of such a young age, I think it's a little bit harder to be much further off on the years, especially when a baby versus a toddler. So going back to the page on Ancestry, we can go down and we see the 1881 Census of Canada, and we see Adelaide is listed as being born in 1880. So we're going to pull that up, and when we zoom in, we see there's a lot of Levys. There are a whole bunch of them, and they are all of the same families. So scrolling down, we're going to be looking for the household of Jeremiah. So here we see all the way at the bottom, we have Jeremiah, Caroline, and then their daughter, Esiabella, son Hezekiah, son Henry, daughter Eunice. Now it looks like son Asaph, but I think that his name was Adolph. I'm not 100% sure. But most importantly, we see Adelaide, and even more specifically 9 months, and they even list her birth in June. Now this is a very important thing, because what we're doing is we're trying to prove a contradiction. The contradiction being born in 1877 or born in 1880. Well, we have 2 documents now saying 1880. Both a census record as well as that application for a birth record from 1945, where she's listing herself as being born in 1880, and she has a witness, it's some relative of hers, that Emily Levy, who's corroborating the whole thing. But there's also something else important about this census, and it has to do with the question of, was Adelaide Jewish? And when we scroll up, we can actually see there's a whole column right here, column 12 for religion. And at the top, we see Baptist, and everybody below is Baptist. So at this point, the entire Levy family on Tancook Island was Baptist. So we're actually going to make a big jump now from Adelaide's father, Jeremiah, and go all the way back to Jeremiah's great-grandfather, Gershom Levy. So you can see here we have Adelaide to Jeremiah, traced up to Jeremiah's father Johann, to his father Nathaniel, and now we have Gershom Levy. But from here, we're going to jump over to Family Search to find more records. So we're just going to type in Gershom Levy. We know Nova Scotia. We're going to do a search. And here we see Gershom Levy, baptized May 30th, 1777, parents Nathan and Susanna Levy. So we can actually look at the record, and this is actually a typed up record from the baptisms in St. Stephen's Parish, an Anglican church. So we know that Gershom was not Jewish, or at least he wasn't born Jewish. So going down 1777, May 30th, Gershom, son of Nathan and Susanna Levy, by Mr. Brown. But one thing about Gershom is that he actually had kind of a sad and tragic life. Gershom was born just a few years after the beginning of the American Revolution, and pretty much right after the beginning of the American Revolution, Patriot privateers would go on raids in coastal towns in Nova Scotia. So Gershom's family was constantly under threat of a raid possibly happening and them being a target. These constant attacks were meant to devastate the coastal communities of Nova Scotia and make it much harder for the maritime British Empire. And these attacks would happen well throughout Gershom's childhood. But on June 30th, 1782, when he was 5 years old, there was an attack on Chester where his family lived. The American privateers were led by Captain Noah Stoddard from Massachusetts, who attacked the town of Chester with 3 ships by firing cannons. But the town militia in Chester was led by Captain Jonathan Prescott, who was born in Massachusetts as well, and had fought in the French and Indian Wars, but then settled in Halifax in 1751 and opened a rum distillery. Captain Jonathan Prescott actually had a lot of relatives still back in Massachusetts who were fighting for the Patriot cause, including his sons, as well as his well-known nephew, Dr. Samuel Prescott, who rode with Paul Revere. I was able to find a reference of the raid on Chester in the History of the County of Lunenburg by Mather Byles de Brizay, which was written in 1895. The entry reads, Captain Prescott had the guns at the blockhouse loaded, but the powder being bad, the shot failed to take effect, and it was feared the enemy would enter and gain possession. Better ammunition having been obtained, one of the privateers was struck, which caused them all to retreat behind Nass's Point. The crews, fully armed, then went ashore and crossed the point as if prepared for a land attack. Seeing Captain Prescott on the opposite side of the harbor, they called to him and asked permission to bury their dead, which it believed was only a feint. He replied that if they would stack their guns and advance in front of them, he would go down and make the necessary arrangements. The end of the conversation was an invitation given to the captains of the privateers to take tea with him. During the latter part of the evening, and while they were enjoying themselves under his hospitable roof, a loud knock was heard at the door, which was followed by a son of the captain asking him in a very audible voice where he should billet 100 men sent from Lunenburg by Colonel Creighton. Billet them, the old gentleman replied, in Houghton's bar. And turning to his guests, he said, Gentlemen, I will be ready for you in the morning. This, of course, was a ruse and well served its purpose, although the 100 men never made their appearance. So basically what they were trying to do was convince these privateers that there were 100 British soldiers heading to Chester to stay in town, which meant that these privateers needed to get out and it would be a bad idea for them to attack Chester again. Now, to convince the privateers that there were actually British soldiers coming, many of the women and children took their coats and turned them inside out because the inside lining was fashionable at the time to be in a scarlet red color. So all of these women and children dressed with these coats that looked red, walking around with all these broomsticks, looked from a distance to be actual British regulars. And this wasn't exactly the largest community, so it's very likely that Gershom and his mother were somehow involved with this, possibly even walking around pretending to be British regulars. Now, as I mentioned, he had a very sad life, and this raid happened in 1782, and just 5 years later, in 1787, at the age of 10, his father passed away. And then just 4 years after that, in 1791, his mother also died when he was only 14 years old. He had some younger siblings as well, so he likely had to take care of them. And in the records on Family Search for the St. Stephen's Parish, we also find Nathaniel Levy's death. And we see Nathaniel Levy departed this life on the 18th day of May, 1787, age 67 years, recorded May 21st, 1787, by Ebenezer Fitch, town clerk. Now, being in 1787, I think there's also that question of, did he die because of something going on with the war, or was it something else? But unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any records that seemed to indicate what the reason of death was. Now, I didn't find a marriage record for Gershom, but his first child was born in 1797, so he's probably born about 1796. He would end up having only 3 children before he died in 1801 at just the age of 24. But one big thing I wanted to do was try to see if I could find his will, because I knew that probate records were available for Nova Scotia through Family Search. So jumping back to Family Search, we're actually going to click down here in the search by place, and clicking on the map, we're just going to go to Canada and choose Nova Scotia. And when we scroll down, we see right here, Canada, Nova Scotia probate records 1760 to 1993. Now, this is a collection that is not indexed, so that means that you can't search it. You have to go page by page. So I had to hit browse all images. So this is all 1 million images. We're then going to go to Lunenburg because we know that he was in Lunenburg. And we're going to go to Letters of Administration 1763 to 1815. So it will start on this single image, but if you hit browse multiple images, you'll see everything. And you literally have to go page by page to try to find it. Now, I'm not going to bore everyone by going page by page, so we're going to go ahead and jump right to the records. So here we have the first page, Inventory of the Personal Estate of Gershom Levy of Chester, Exhibition to the Probate's Office, 2nd of March, 1802 by Joseph Demick. And just going through, we can just go page by page and it lists everything. So we see an inventory of the personal estate of Gershom Levy of the Chester, deceased, taken by William Cole and Lot Church, proprietor of this town, Chester, November 11th, 1801. 1 silver watch, 6 old broken chairs, 2 old tubs, and all sorts of other stuff. And then here at the bottom, we get the signatures of those doing the different things. And here we see Catherine Levy, her resignation, October 9th, 1801. And here we see, whereas Gershom Levy of Chester in the county of Lunenburg, province of Nova Scotia, yeoman, my late husband, dying intestate, and whereas my own affairs will not allow me to take upon me the execution of the said estate of the deceased, I do by those present pronounce the execution of the said estate being fully determined not to take out probate of the same, given under my hand and seal this 19th day of October in the year of our Lord, looks like 1801. So we scroll down and we see his mark for Christian graves. We see Joseph Demick, and over here on the right, her mark, Catherine Levy. So being that it's her mark, that tells us that she likely did not know how to read or write. And then here we have a record of what was sold at a public auction and how much it was sold for. So we can see the Barney Kane 1 watch, and we can go through and see how everything sold. Now that's where we're going to end today's episode, but on the next episode, we're going to continue tracing the Levy family. We're going to look into Gershom's father, Nathan or Nathaniel, who came to Nova Scotia from Philadelphia and was likely Matt's last fully Jewish ancestor. But to be sure whether or not this Levy family truly was Jewish, we're also going to look into DNA. And for anyone who'd like to learn more about using DNA for Jewish genealogy, be sure to check out this video of mine right here where I talk about how to overcome problems with endogamy. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe by clicking right about here. It's completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.